myself included, to jump into that race. And we hope there'll be some news on that soon. But without further ado, Adam Hasner.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the kind introduction, and more importantly, thank you all so much for taking the time to come out. I feel so much like on my own side of the room here, and you guys are standing. So I will try my best to be as brief as possible. And I know this is an important day. I know we're the chairman. Up there she is. I will just mention that Deborah Cox-Roush is out there, the chairman of the Hillsborough County Republican Party, and I know we're fighting hard today to win some important runoff elections in Hillsborough. What some people actually don't know, I'll just do it by brief background. Yes, I was the former majority leader of the Florida House of Representatives. Marco Rubio tapped me to be the majority leader in 2007, and I had the unique experience and privilege to serve in that position for 4 years under several different speakers of the Florida House, and really it was a fantastic honor. I got to serve with a lot of the great Republicans that you have from this area. Now, what some people don't know about me is that even though I'm from Palm Beach County and represented a district that certainly is not a conservative district by any stretch of the imagination, is that I actually lived in Tampa, in downtown Tampa, for a year back in the late 1990s, and so was part of the Tampa community and actually hosted, and I get to brag a little bit, I hosted the first friend-raiser and meet and greet for Chris Hart, who was then running for the State House of Representatives. So Chris, that would be the fourth, I think, right, is a very good friend, and obviously I'm pulling for his dad tonight as well. And so as part of the introduction, I guess the secret is out, but yes, I have officially opened an exploratory committee to challenge Bill Nelson for the United States Senate in 2012. Filing the paperwork was the easy part. Actually, I'm having a lot of fun, and why I'm having so much fun is that I have spent the last almost 45 days traveling around the state and meeting with groups like this, groups, smaller groups of individual meetings, and also have had the privilege of spending a lot of time with what I would call one of the most fascinating political movements that I think we've witnessed in our country, and that is really what you would call the 9/12 groups or the Tea Party groups. And I've got a message for anyone on the left or anyone in the liberal media who thinks that that was a one-time occurrence in 2010 and that they're just going to go off into the sunset and disappear. The people who are involved in that movement are more energized, more engaged, and more educated than ever before, and they look at it the same way that I do. 2010 was just the beginning. 2012, we are going to send reinforcements to Washington because they believe in the message that enough is enough. We want our elected leaders to tell it like it is, and if they're not going to get the job done, then we're going to send people up there who are going to do it. And so I have been so privileged to be able to go out and share that, share the time and share the experience and really learn. And that's, as I said, has really inspired me. Because right now, I don't know what the exact number of years are, but right now, time is running short for America to turn things around and to start really tackling the real problems that we're facing. And that means, first and foremost, it means getting our fiscal house in order, both short-term and long-term. And right now, the debate taking place in Washington, we've got this looming budget showdown. I was just talking briefly with some of our friends who are visiting from Washington, and while I know they might take some offense to this, I want to just share with you, because my message is going to be the same whether I'm in Palm Beach or over in Panama City or whether I'm here in Tampa. And I think it's important because we don't have a lot of time to address these issues. And so, this issue of continuing resolutions, while it may postpone the inevitable for a few more weeks, while there may be some more backroom negotiations, the issues that we're dealing with are so huge in size and scope that that's just not going to be enough. It's not going to get us there. Now, that $61 billion proposal that the House Republicans put forward and passed, I thought that was a great first step. And now you're starting to see that even that debate, the way that it's taking shape, is not really going anywhere. And I think it's time for Republicans to be bolder. I think it's time for Republicans to go out and start to educate. And you saw Rand Paul do a little bit of it in terms of showing what the actual size of the cuts were in terms of how it compared to the budget. And so getting through this first issue now of continuing resolutions, I think you saw some members stand up, some of the young freshmen and others, our United States Senator Marco Rubio, as well as other members of Congress. Alan West is one that I can think of off the top of my head, who said, we're not going to do these nickel and dime measures. We need the American people to understand how real this threat is, or how real this threat is to the future economic stability of the country. And I will tell you that after the continuing resolution debate is coming, I want people to understand that we can't, as Republicans, be worried about the political consequences or the possible fallout from a potential shutdown in government. What we need to be worrying about are the consequences to this country if we don't solve these problems. And that's why it's not just important to send Republicans to Washington or Republicans to Tallahassee for that matter. It's time to make sure that we are sending principled conservatives to these leadership positions, because there isn't much margin for error anymore, and we really need to be honest with people and tell them exactly what it's going to take to solve these problems. And so short-term spending, we've seen all the reports in terms of some of the government reports about redundancies and waste in government. That's the low-hanging fruit. The long-term spending reforms are really the problems that we have to tackle. And I have to admit that I have aged out officially of being a young Republican. I've crossed that threshold, which beats the alternative, I guess. But what I will remind everyone is that I was the president of the Tallahassee Young Republicans, and so I was in the same position that many of you here were in. I was a little bit more involved in politics than was mentioned earlier. But the reality is that people used to tell us back then, young Republicans, you're the future of the Republican Party. I think Chairman Roush would agree with me. Young Republicans, you are the party now. We need your voices. We need you involved and engaged, because all of the decisions that are being made today impact you, if not just as much, probably even more than the decisions that might have been being made, or when people were talking about this years ago when I was hearing that type of line of, oh, you're the future. We need you guys engaged. We need you to get your friends more involved, because whenever I'm in a room like this, and this is kind of a little bit of a split room, there's some more seasoned Republicans in the room, but whenever I ask this question to a YR group, I ask the question, I said, how many of you actually believe that Social Security or Medicare are going to be there for you when you become eligible? Any hands? There's never a hand that goes up. And so I think we need to take the responsibility and take that burden right now to start talking about what is Social Security and Medicare going to look like in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years, and how do we want these programs to look, or do we want to transition completely out of them? Do we want to change the way that we pay for Medicare and allow people to access health care benefits at a certain age? Do we want to change what Social Security is? And those are the things that we need the next generation, this generation, to be involved with, not later on, but now, and be part of that debate. And so I think that I'm on that cusp of leaders who can not only speak to generations that have come before, but who are also very concerned and very engaged with our age group and with those who are coming up right now, who are going to be the ones who are going to have to live under a new system at some point in time. And so we need leaders who are willing to tackle these tough issues and talk about them in a way that I think is honest, and more importantly, that is reform-oriented. And so I think this is a very important issue for us to be talking about in terms of fiscal stability for our country. We also talk all the time about job creation and changing the tax code and doing the types of things to break down the barriers to success. We need to grow our economy. Spending cuts alone are not going to get us there. They're not going to restore the economic prosperity. And so we have to have a plan. And you're seeing it now in Florida, and you're seeing it in other places where governors are getting serious about tackling these tough issues. And so I'm excited that there's this movement where conservative leaders can get into office and, more importantly, can govern as conservatives. And so I'll talk briefly about the debt, because you hear these numbers being thrown at you all the time. $1.6 trillion annual deficit. this past year. We now have over $14 trillion national debt. And I will tell you that just doing the types of things that we've been talking about in the past aren't enough. I've been a big proponent of a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. I joined Ken Blackwell, who's a conservative leader from Ohio. We founded a group called PassTheBBA.com. We've been getting great response, been working with Senator Mike Lee from Utah. And now the debate in Washington, I believe, is no longer over whether we're going to pass a balanced budget amendment or not. The debate is over what is that balanced budget amendment going to look like. But it goes back to the issue that a BBA alone is not enough. We're going to have things in our budget like a spending cap to start bringing down those annual deficits and to start reducing the debt, because we must cut the spending, stop the borrowing, balance the budget, and reduce the debt. And when you're talking about this $14 trillion debt, I also want you to think of it beyond just being a fiscal mess. I think you need to also realize that it is now America's greatest national security threat. Because if we continue to borrow money from countries that do not share our values and interests, and we can't act on the world stage and take that moral leadership and take that moral authority, then I would submit to you that every day, little by little, we are effectively losing our nation's very own sovereignty. And you begin to start seeing that when America can't act on the global stage in its best interest and in our national security interest, because we're concerned about countries that currently own our debt, whether it's China or whether it's countries in the Middle East. And I think that brings up the issue of our energy policy, or lack thereof, an energy policy here in this country. And the fact that we're sending nearly $1 trillion a year, as I like to say, to countries that don't like us very much, because we're unwilling to explore for domestic resources, for oil and natural gas. And as I told you before, it may not be popular coming to Tampa Bay and talking about the importance of drilling off of America's coasts. But we have to do it if we want to be more energy secure and more energy independent. And it's not just here off of Florida's coast and in other areas of the Gulf Coast, but it's in ANWR, and it's in the new technologies for discovering oil and other resources through shale drilling and all of those new innovations. And so we have to be in all of the above type of energy policy. And even with the tragedy that exists right now in Japan, even with that tragedy, I don't think we can pull back from trying to promote nuclear power. It makes up a huge portion of our energy generation, and I think we need to continue going down that path, continuing, though, to always make sure it's safe and secure, but it needs to be a part of our energy portfolio. Now turning back real quick to the issue of national security, let me just say this about the Obama administration's views on foreign policy. I would say that they have, at best, a warped view of foreign policy, and you're seeing it right now as it relates to our intervention in Libya, and the fact that whether you agree or disagree, now that we're in, we have to go and finish the job. And Barack Obama could have, in my opinion, made America much more safe and taken a much more leadership role if he had just as opposed to advocating and waiting for other countries to step forward. But really what it is that our nation, I would call it the Obama doctrine of engaging our enemies and distancing America from our allies, has made America less safe, less trusted, and less respected around the world. And that's why we're facing so many of the issues that we're facing right now, is because regardless of all of the attempts to go out and hit reset buttons, or even that whole tour where Obama went out and apologized, and bowed before foreign leaders, that is the type of foreign policy that makes us perceived as being weaker around the world, and in actuality it actually makes us weaker on the global stage. And so we have to restore a national security platform based on the Ronald Reagan philosophy of peace through strength. Now, for those of you who are big Ronald Reagan fans, you know the history. Ronald Reagan made it look easy to project that philosophy of America is safer when America is stronger. But the reality is that we cannot fight an enemy when we are not even willing to admit or acknowledge that an enemy exists. And that enemy has a name, and that is Sharia-compliant radical Islam. And we cannot allow political correctness or multiculturalism or appeasement cripple our defenses at home or abroad. Because this is not just a threat that exists on foreign soil. there is also a threat from those who seek to destroy us from within. Now, you saw the hearings just this past week in Washington with Congressman Peter King, who I applaud for his courageous effort. I still think that he could have done a much better job of having a real debate. Now, a lot of people were upset with Peter King for having these hearings about the radicalization of the Muslim population here in the United States. What I'm upset about, and as I talk to more and more people, what I find they're more upset about is the fact that it's taken nearly 10 years to have this dialogue, to have this conversation. And so we can do it in a very sober and non-alarming way, but it's a conversation that we need to have because first and foremost, we need to be finding ways, or we need to be doing things to protect ourselves here domestically and make ourselves stronger abroad. I've yet to hear the president talk about the act of terrorism in the name of jihad of the 2 American servicemen who were killed in Germany. The president has been silent on that, and so yet, again, those are issues that are taking place on foreign soil and here at home. And so let me just wrap up by talking about one thing that I think is extremely important, because there's a lot of Republicans right now who are saying we need a truce on social issues. We need to stop talking about the sanctity of human life or the importance of the institution of marriage. I could not disagree more, because it is the breakdown of the family. It is the breakdown of fundamental values that I believe has created a dependency society and has created the need to grow government larger and larger to try to cure all the problems that ail us. And it's important to remember, too, that American prosperity, our strong national security, and our foundational Judeo-Christian principles are inseparable and interwoven. There is a reason why during Ronald Reagan's presidency, the Republican Party soared when those 3 pillars were aligned. But more importantly, there is a reason why America soared when we were united on those 3 fronts. And so, for me, going around and sharing this message, I think is important, because right now the issues could not be more challenging in Washington and around this country. And I believe it's time that we have leaders who are willing to say what needs to be said, and more importantly, have the courage and the principles to do what needs to be done. I've demonstrated that in the past. When it wasn't popular to be a conservative in Tallahassee, I was a conservative. When it wasn't popular to challenge Charlie Crist, I was the one challenging Charlie Crist. We need more people like that who are willing to take on those tough battles and sometimes even call out Republicans. Because I would also tell you that it's not just Democrats that have created the problems and the mess that we're in today. We share as Republicans in that blame. And that's why the 9/12 movement and the Tea Party movements and all those, that's why they're not partisan movements. They want constitutionalists, they want people who are going to go govern based on core conservative principles. And that's why they understand that just sending Republicans up to Washington or as decision makers is not simply the answer, that we need conservative, principled leaders to go and get the job done. And so this is the message that I've been fortunate enough for the past few weeks to take around the state. It's the one that I hope to continue to share. It's the one that I hope to continue to build on and learn from others and learn from you while we're out there, because we have a lot of work to do. 2010, as I said before, is just the beginning. If we are going to turn this country around, we have got to take back control and be in the majority in the United States Senate, and we have to make Barack Obama a one-term president. And so the work is ahead. I look forward to joining you and so many others around the state that I've met with and that I've had the opportunity to talk with in doing the hard work and doing the things that are necessary to restore the promise of America for today and for future generations. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Behind me. And this is how I know. Let me just point a personal privilege here. This is how I actually know that I am no longer eligible to be in the Young Republicans, because Brian Fasulo, for those of you who don't know him, Brian Fasulo, who is a former media personality here in the Tampa Bay area, but also Brian and I played Little League baseball together from the time we were about 7 years old in North Palm Beach, Florida. And we were on the 13-year-old all-star teams together, traveling around the state. And so I know that we are about the same age. So I know you're not eligible for the YRZ anymore. But thank you for being here.
Yeah, I came with my dad too, which was really
So please, let's open it up for questions. Brian, it's so great to see you. Our families grew up together in North Palm Beach, and he's over here, so thanks for the surprise. Excellent, excellent. No questions, or these guys are like dying because they don't have chairs.
Okay,
I
no,
apologize.
I don't want, I mean, if you want, we can do something more informal, but I'll throw one question out to you. As a lawyer, there was a recent case that has made a little bit of news, not enough news in my opinion.
Sure.
Here in Hillsborough County, which was a judge, a respected judge, Judge Nielsen, who agreed to hear a case under Sharia law.
Yeah.
And it's a complicated issue, Sharia law, but I think it's an important issue, and I think you're someone who understands it well and can convey the importance of making sure that this type of law does not creep into the American legal system to large audiences. So I was wondering if you could comment on Sharia law, because again, this was earlier this month that this happened here.
It just happened. I've been following this very closely. I've spoken out about it in some other venues, and I'll be glad to share with you my thoughts here, is that I am very concerned, and there's some folks that I've read their opinions from the other side. I am very concerned about what you would call the use of Sharia law to base a decision on. Now, the judge has his own legal reasoning, but to me, Sharia law is not a complicated issue. Sharia law is something we should be very concerned about if it's something that's going to be used in Florida courts and in American courts. And so I challenge Judge Nielsen to explain his position on this issue much more clearly than he did in his opinion. And I certainly am opposed to any of the types of extra rights and privileges that would be provided to people in order to use Sharia law in our legal system. And so I'm waiting to see more about this case, but all the initial reports that I've seen from it are very alarming in terms of the insinuation of Islamic Sharia law into Florida's court systems. Yes, sir.
To go along, to follow up with that, Oklahoma, this past general election, voted a bill in, an anti-Sharia law bill, which was recently not recently, but around January, it was overturned in the Supreme Court. So, is this more of a national issue bill that should be taken up, or relative to the states?
So there was a good reason why the Oklahoma bill was overturned as unconstitutional, because it was violative of the United States Constitution in terms of discriminating against a specific religion. There is legislation in Florida, in Tallahassee. State Representative Larry Metz and State Senator Alan Hayes have sponsored legislation that would preclude or prohibit the infiltration of not Sharia law by name, but the types of laws that discriminate against women, discriminate against homosexuals, and don't value First Amendment rights and don't value human rights. So that legislation is currently in Tallahassee. I'm not as in tune as I used to be as it relates to the goings-on in our state capitol in terms of day-to-day legislation, so I would contact them. And I believe Congresswoman from our own home state, Sandy Adams, has actually introduced similar legislation to prohibit that same type of ruling or that same type of situation from taking place in our federal courts. So I think people are paying attention to it, and I think it just goes back to what I said before. We can have this conversation in a very sober and non-alarming manner. And I want to be very clear about this. When the threat of Nazi Germany was starting to boil, and folks like Winston Churchill and others were speaking out about it, they weren't speaking out against all Germans. When we realized the threat of Mussolini, we certainly weren't talking about all Italians. And so we're not talking about all Muslims here. We're not talking about the entire Muslim community. We're talking about a very specific group of people who are trying to advance their, not just religious doctrine, but their political and theocratic doctrine on others. And it's not just a risk here in the United States. You're seeing it in Europe. You're seeing it elsewhere. It's something that keeps me up at night as it relates to the void of leadership in places like Egypt and in other areas. Is Egypt going to become a liberal democracy, or are we going to see the takeover by the Muslim Brotherhood, or is it going to be another Iran from the 1970s? These are the things that keep me up. These are the tough issues. And so the issue of Sharia law in our state courts or in our federal courts is something to be aware of and something to be educated about, and certainly something for us to discuss. But understanding what's going on around the world as it relates to that threat from radical Islam and from the extremist Islamists, I think that's what really is concerns me, and I think concerns so many people right now. Yes, Janelle. Who, by the way, she gets like the Trooper of the Day award. She got a flat tire. And not only did she get a flat tire and got a change, but she made it out to Oldsmar to see us at our last stop, and she made it back here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody own like a towing company? Get a discount for next time?
Given your background, which you didn't explain to this
Sure.
crowd, with medical finance, which is usually my forte, the elephant in the budget that nobody ever wants to talk about is Medicare and Medicaid.
Yeah.
I mean, you would know the percentages a bit better than me, but it is by far the biggest item budget that we have in Florida. And on a national scale, it's just absolutely bankrupting things, and it's on a hospital level not a great program. So how do you see reforming this? How do you see, and you say that, you know, many of us don't even believe that Medicare will be around, so what's the fix?
Sure. So let me just take one opportunity here to do something that Janelle was prodding me to do, is to tell you also that when I lived here, I was working for a healthcare company, a hospital company, doing mergers and acquisitions. And so I traveled around Florida and around the country acquiring healthcare-related businesses, hospitals and physician practices, and created an integrated network. So much to my parents' chagrin, I did not practice law after graduating from Florida State Law School. I went into business. Yeah, Richard and Judy were pretty upset about that. Brian would know. But what you're talking about is there are fixes, and I'm sure Gus's chief of staff and some of the others from Washington know that there is a plan out there, and I think that the Paul Ryan roadmap is a great beginning in terms of how to provide people with the opportunity for accessing Medicare through, I hate using the word voucher, but for lack of a better term, to be able to access Medicare that way. In addition, I think you're seeing the attempts at Medicaid reform in Florida and in some other states would have more flexibility at the state level and block grants to the state level. But listen, there's no 10-point plan that I think anyone has come behind right now. I think right now what we're trying to do is get everybody to recognize how big and how significant the problem is, and then we can have the debate. What too many people are worried about right now is the idea that if Republicans put forward a plan, the Democrats are just going to start pointing fingers and we're going to lose political points. And I blame Republicans in the sense that you're hearing Republicans start saying, well, we can't have this debate without presidential leadership. I don't know what kind of leadership that is to say we can't have a debate without them coming out and taking the lead. Everyone wants the other guy to go first. And I said it earlier, we need to be focused on the consequences from inaction to the country and not consequences politically from putting out proposals, because I think the American people are yearning to hear it. They understand how significant the challenges are, how big and complex they are. They just want people to tell it like it is. And I think you just saw the first wave of people do it in 2010. And I think in 2012, if we don't get in, as I was talking about earlier, that set of reinforcements, this movement could stall. And if this movement stalls, I'm not sure where this country goes. And that's what I think we're all concerned about, which is, are we destined for economic doom if we don't solve these problems? And I would think that the answer to that is yes, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know. But if we don't start putting those programs on a correction course, then we're never going to turn this thing around. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. With everything going on in Wisconsin right now with the unions, and obviously now we're having the same issues here or similar issues in Florida, what are your thoughts on the bills that Chris Dorworth in the House is sponsoring and Senator John Thrasher? And what are your thoughts on those bills, and where do you see them progressing as we get farther down session?
So, I apologize. Just tell me which bills you're referring to. Paycheck protection? Yeah, okay. Okay, good. So the issue of paycheck protection, and here it goes back to what I was saying just a little bit ago, which is that 4 years ago, I was sponsoring something called the 65-cent solution to force more dollars into the classroom and less on administrative overhead and bureaucracy in our school districts. We could have put over $1 billion more into our classroom without raising taxes if we were just able to eliminate all the overhead and waste that takes place in what I like to call the Taj Mahals of the school district buildings. And I know Hillsborough has a fantastic school district, and I know they run lean and mean, but we can always do better. The reason why I bring that issue up is because I was challenging the teachers' unions back in 2006 and 2007 on this specific issue, 2005 and 2006 on this specific issue. I had teacher unions protesting my office and all those types of things, and I was taking on those battles, as I like to say, before it was popular to take on those battles. And I bring it fast forward to the issue of what we did last year that Charlie Crist ultimately vetoed, which was the issue of teacher tenure and reforming how we compensate teachers. Last year it wasn't popular. Last year we actually had to work so hard just to corral the Republicans to vote with us to reform the system. This year, I think that I read correctly that all 80 Republicans voted for the teacher tenure reforms. That's great news, but I will tell you, the reason why is because this past election, the message was received. And I think that's what you're seeing in Wisconsin as well, is that the message has been received and people now have the courage. They won't continue to have the courage unless you and others keep their feet to the fire. That's why it's so important in this issue of paycheck protection. It's a long time in coming. I mean, I was the one, and I hope Deborah Cox-Roush will remember this, but I was the one that went right before the RPOF meeting, way before anybody was talking about who was funding fair districts. And we were yelling from the top of the rooftop saying, this is Acorn and George Soros, and these are the unions and the trial lawyers, and all these groups are funding this. We need to do something. We need to wake up. We need to have a plan against it. And no one wanted to do anything. And by the time we actually did get people involved and engaged, it was too late. And those 2 amendments passed. And we're going to find out what ends up happening with the Supreme Court. Which, by the way, the Supreme Court is now tilted 4-3 for one reason and one reason only. Charlie Crist appointed a left-leaning Florida Supreme Court. So we don't know how these cases are going to be decided. But all of those issues and taking those principled stands, I was out there 4 years ago, as I said before, it was popular. Now I'm excited to see that we're actually advancing the policy, but we need people who are willing to take those stands even when it's not politically popular to do. And Chris Christie and Scott Walker and Rick Scott and others have the courage and have those principles. I'm just hoping that it's contagious and more Republicans are going to say, you know what, I'm not going to worry about the political consequences. I'm going to do what's right.
So I think I'm safe in saying that, sorry, I got tired of standing, that we all are in agreement that we need to cut the budget and cut it where we can. But I'm a little surprised to hear you speak so favorably of actually a government shutdown. Yeah. And I should confess my bias because I work for the government. And as I understand it, as an attorney, I'll continue working, but all of our staff will have a 2-week paid vacation. And they all get paid at the end, and I get paid at the end too. And last time it happened, it just cost the government a whole lot of money because people get free vacations, and then you have to spend the money on all the services that were stopped for whatever the rate is. So I guess
Well, I'm not advocating for a government shutdown. What I am suggesting is that we can't be afraid of the political fallout from a government shutdown. To be able to get our message out, to be able to demonstrate what these challenges are. If we continue to pass 3-week, 4, whatever that number is, continuing resolutions, we're playing right into the hands of our political opponents. And the reason why is this. From my perspective, and maybe the folks standing right next to you might have a different opinion, but the reason why this plays into our opponents' hands is because what they are waiting for is for the next year's fiscal year budget to be produced. And once that is, they are going to jump all over it and start calling us heartless and start saying, look, you're taking away, grandma's Social Security and you're taking this away and that away. And what I'm saying is that day is inevitably coming. So why we're trying to kick the can down the street for 2 weeks or 3 weeks at a time, it's not benefiting us in any way. We're actually playing into what I would consider a political trap. And so I believe in politics and in the legislative process, which for those of you who know, it's a not always it's a pretty messy process, right? But the reality is that if you're not on offense, you're on defense. And I think right now we're playing on defense, and I think we need to go on offense because the facts are on our side. The gloom, the looming problems are on our side. Now, does that make us happy? No, but we have, I believe, the better solutions to fix the problems. And I think if we demonstrate to people that we're serious about it, they're going to come our way.
I was going to say that, Adam, we hadn't met until today, and I was fascinated. Could you talk about some of the things that other groups were talking about, the NRA, the Right to Life, or Conservative Union, and that, the scorecards, and what they say about you?
Yeah, briefly, it's always hard. I can talk about issues all day long. It's harder to actually talk about myself. So I'll try to do a better job of that.
Well, and I apologize.
Yeah, to see he let me down. He let me down.
Skip to the bullet points. In fact, Adam's credentials in that regard are top notch. This is a man with a 100% pro-life rating, an A+ rating from the NRA, and anybody who is familiar with the conservative press knows that the National Review just had a very complimentary piece on Adam. So when it comes to conservative credentials, I know you're too humble to admit it.
No, it's not.
They are stellar.
I just don't do it. I get so deep into the weeds on policy and things like that and talk about what I think are really the big issues, and I kind of skip over the important part. I like to tell you, as Brian knows, that I'm the son of 2 Jewish Democrat public school teachers from Brooklyn. And so that makes everybody ask the question, like, how did you become a pro-life, pro-gun conservative? And growing up in Palm Beach County certainly didn't, being born in Brooklyn wasn't the bastion of conservatism, and growing up in Palm Beach County didn't make it any easier, but I've certainly been a fighter for what I believe in. Let's do somebody who hasn't done one yet. Go for it.
So you talked about the entitlement programs, and we know that those are unfunded liabilities, and that's a security risk. But you've got half of the population that pretty much doesn't even believe it's going to exist, and then you've got the other half of the population that admittedly doesn't really want to deal with the issue because they're about to start receiving.
Yeah.
Okay, so where it seems like the Republicans and also fiscally conservative Republicans have struggled is in how to convey that message to persuade people that this is not just us borrowing money to say fight a war, which you can quit doing, but this is putting us at a security risk internationally because we're borrowing money to pay ourselves, which is hard to give away, hard to give back. So how can we maybe improve our message as a party about the importance of this issue, because the country's divided on that right now?
I think you said it very eloquently. So let me just reiterate to what I had mentioned earlier, which is that we're right on the issues. I mean, I think we understand. I think we now have the country moving in our direction. We need to do a better job of articulating exactly what you said and what I've been going around the state and talking about, which is to let people know the serious consequences of inaction. And so whether that message is going to come from Rand Paul, or whether it's going to come from Eric Cantor or Marco Rubio or Gus Bilirakis or anybody else, Dennis Ross locally, I think what I would hope for is that the Republican leadership in Washington doesn't sit back and say, hey, we want presidential leadership before we act. They say, here's our plan. This is what we need to be talking about. This is what we need to accomplish. And when you go home to your districts, when you go back, during town hall meetings and things like that, this is the message that we need to get out. And I think that process of educating is a very important one. I know that it's beginning and it's going to take some time. The problem is I just don't know, again, how much time we actually have. And we can't allow ourselves to be distracted by shiny objects. I mean, I think we have to have purpose, and we have to be able to go right at the heart of the problem. And I think as soon as you do that, you're going, and I've already started to see it, if anybody's seen the AARP ads that have already started to run, that is the beginning of an anti-Medicare, anti-Social Security reform campaign that is already beginning. Harry Reid's already said, we don't need to touch Social Security. That's not the problem. It's not going to be a crisis for 20 more years. Why do we need to touch it now? So that's the mentality that we're fighting against, and there's going to be special interests on the other side that are going to be opposed to us. I just think we need to be fearless. I've worn everybody out who's standing. Why don't we'll do it privately, because I think everybody's been locked in place for a while now. I apologize. Thank you guys so much. It has been a great time. Thank you.
Say hi to Rob Stern.